the more I'm like liking older cameras because they're much more forgiving than the cameras you get in the modern day. It's crazy how sort of it can pick out every single sort of gray hair, every single wrinkle. So yeah, I need to have some sort of old technology in order to get through these
I
next several
know.
years.
I'm all for moving back to VHS, kind of blurry lines, right? Much
That's
better.
right. The Polaroid was my peak when it came to to camera footage. Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. We're live at Founders Focus. Folks, this is one of my favorite things to do. And the reason why is simply I've just learned so much from speaking to people that are leading recruitment technology businesses. It seems to me that it takes a certain type of character who's gone through a certain type of journey to end up sort of in the places where these folks have been. And there's so many lessons that we can learn from people who've gone through that journey. So Founders Focus is the series where we get up close and personal with the people leading the work tech that's changing the way we operate in business today. And today I'm delighted to welcome Runar Reistrup, CEO of YunoJuno, onto the show. So welcome to Founders Focus, Runar.
Thank you, Ung. Great to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Fantastic stuff. And I know you're a busy man. Like one of the things I have doing this show is I really feel quite guilty because I'm stealing an hour's worth of like super valuable time from YunoJuno. So I'm aware how much money this may be costing the business. What seriously important thing did you have to cancel in order to come onto the show today?
I was going to say none because we scheduled this, but actually I did cancel something early this morning to make room for this. And that was my HIT class, which I think is actually, but I've found lesson number one. It's very important. It really kind of makes me clear my head, keeps the stress away. So I'm going to do it after this. I'm going to do it tonight.
100%. Do you know that that's worth starting on? Because one of the things that when people are founding businesses for the first time is going to be people listening to this thinking, I want to go on the entrepreneurial journey. Like your physical fitness is actually really important because that really has a strong relationship to your mental fitness also. If you're not sort of in good shape physically, in fact, your mind goes as well. When did you discover that as a lesson, Runo? Was that always in? Because I know you're Danish, so Danish people seem to be very fit to me. But has the idea of keeping in shape always been a thing, or did you learn that through sort of being in business over time?
No, I had to learn it. I had to learn it. So yeah, I've generally kept in shape, and then I became busy with building companies, and I thought, well, it's easy to skip that for a year or two, but it really takes its toll. And I think, as you say, it's physical and mental. Um, those two strengths go together. And believe it or not, I had to go pretty far back. I read Aristotle. Um, he had figured it out, and that's 3,000 years ago. And even at that point, it was very clear that those two things are very interlinked. So I had to relearn it, and now I prioritize that.
Yeah, I don't want to dive into philosophy because I don't know too much about it, but I think Rene Descartes did us all a disservice by putting the mind-body dichotomy. He was the one that, by the way, you said, I think therefore I am, and then suddenly everyone thought, oh, the mind is different from the body, but it's like sitting in our bodies. It's a biological entity that's completely integrated with the rest of our bodies. Why is it different? Why are we thinking it is a separate thing? It is all one thing. And in fact, we've got to keep the entire thing in good shape. In terms of your sort of making sure people stay fit, getting fit, have you ever implemented anything on the company scale to say, hey, not to impress on and invade people's sort of personal attitudes or time, but to encourage, people's to eat healthily, be healthy, and be, physically strong and not burn too many hours on the grindstone in a counterproductive way?
I have actually. I've once I ran a small team of about 30 people, and I signed us everyone up for a company-wide CrossFit class twice a week. and it made wonders for teamwork. There's nothing there's nothing like seeing each other in that situation to just break down barriers. It was really good. I'd recommend it if your team size is small enough and if everyone is into this stuff. At the same time, it's not something to impress on others, but I do encourage people to kind of make sure they take care of their health. I think it's important.
The team aspect is so, you remind me actually of the business I met earlier this year in Montreal in Canada. And they actually did the same thing. It was small enough for everyone to get in the gym. The leadership team kind of got a gauge as to where people were in terms of, like, everyone seemed to be trying to get fit and whatever. Okay, let's do it together. And as the boss said, it was a big equalizer, because suddenly, the leader of the business may actually be the worst person on the bike, and suddenly it's like, okay, we're actually all together as a group. So yeah, really interesting experiment to try and build those bonds and just change up those relationships that you have in a group. What have you learned about ideal team size, Runar? Like, a lot of people seem to say, okay, 8 people, the Jeff Bezos 2 pizza rule, never have a meeting unless you can feed everyone with 2 pizzas. Other people like Jensen Huang at NVIDIA says, yeah, I've got 150 direct reports. So it's like, I have huge amounts of people. Like, have you settled on a particular like size where you think this is the right for me? And why do you think this?
Well, not right for me, but I do have a view on what the right team size is when you're still kind of searching for product market fit, if you're in that stage of a company. Otherwise, I don't think you can talk about ideal team sizes. It's what the company requires. I've seen companies where the ideal team size is 1 and everything is automated. And a business that tries to stay at 1 for as long as possible, that's pretty impressive. And you can do that with the tools these days to a degree, and depends on what business you run. But you can actually go quite a far away before you actually have a team. In terms of the ideal team size, I've been at that stage both with Depop and with YunoJuno, where we were about, I would say, 18 people, very specific here. I remember Depop was very clear because we sat at one long table, starting with back-end engineers, then front-end engineers, then product management, ending up at the other end with customer success. And that to me was an ideal team size when we were working all hours of the day, trying to kind of find this product market fit. And there would be a direct communication between customer success at the one end and a back-end engineer at the other end around, well, what's happening here? Is this wrong? We did the same at YunoJuno during the pandemic, where we had to shrink in size. Obviously, everyone at home, no table, but it got very similar in terms of how we communicate on Slack. And there's just something about being less than 20 people where communication becomes so easy. So you can explore, you can change strategies twice a day if you want to, and execute immediately. Once you get above 50, that gets harder. Once you get to 150, it gets really hard. Once you get to 150,000, it's a super tanker.
Yeah, that's it. I can just visualize that table. It's a wonderful image that I have. It's almost like a dining table, right? So
yeah.
Everyone's on one.
It was.
And of course, you have direct communication with everyone. So if there's a problem, you get immediate response. You get immediate sort of feedback on issues. You can see it'll speed it up. And of course, this is part of the reason why we have seen kind of people say, look, we got to get back on premise. We got to do this, that, and the other. How do you feel about that argument, Runar? Do you think at an early stage of a business, it's justified to say that when you're just crashing together pre-product market fit, that intensity will help you get there sooner? Or do you think actually it can be achieved on a completely remote basis, so long as you've established the communications and how you're meant to respond?
I think you can achieve it on a remote basis. As a matter of fact, I think it was 2 very similar experiences sitting around the long table at kind of these 18 people or so, and sitting around the Slack table, if you like, during the same time. You get those same very innovative dynamics. Now, of course, no company wants to stay at that stage. We didn't either. So in both cases, we scaled way beyond. But it's just in terms of, you asked about the ideal team size. If you're searching for product market fit, if you haven't completely gotten yet, you're not at the scaling stage, then I would really recommend trying to stay small as long as possible. I think it's very important. I know some people say 7. That's obviously a different level of small scale. I think at that level, it can be hard to run a company at the same time. But if you're just building, I would say, yeah, that's probably the right size. But then after that, and at this point, I don't think there's as an ideal size. Ambition's pretty big, so the team will have to grow as part of it. And then it's just trying to keep as much of that, I kind of call it pirate ship mentality as you go, right? You're not joining the Navy, you're joining a pirate ship. And I really want to make sure that when YunoJuno is 1,000 people, it still is that. It's not the establishment, if you like.
Yeah, very interesting, and I love the image of that. It's a disruptor. You're there to do things different outside of the lanes that the traditional Navy would sail in. You're going to do things and make a change. I want to dive back into your history a little bit, Runar, because you've obviously worked at big and small businesses. I get the sense that your natural vibe is with this sort of startup scale sort of business. That I think that's where you get your energy. But of course, you have worked for Megacorp before as well. And I just wondered whether you could share with us how those things were different, and how you needed to adapt as a leader, because were the leadership qualities that you had at a smaller business and a scaling business, were they compatible for a leadership role at as you were at Vodafone, for instance?
Yeah, so you're right. I gravitate towards the more faster moving execution environments. And megacorps are not that generally. They can become, some are. My joining of Vodafone is kind of the consequences of sometimes building successful startups is that they get acquired. And there was a company in Copenhagen that I was part of that got acquired, and part of the acquisition was you have to go to London and kind of merge this culture into Megacorp. But I got a very clear brief to say, look, we don't want to change the way you work. We want to change the way we work. So come in and work in the way you're already working. I did that at full throttle, uncalibrated. That didn't work out really well. That caused some issues, I can say. But then I calibrated the approach, and it started working really well, because at the end of the day, it's still about execution and driving forward. And we were actually able to build in a very different culture inside of that larger company.
It's very interesting. You mentioned that the charge in, change everything kind of approach didn't work. Tell us a little bit about that, Runar. Upon reflection, like why did it not work, and what was the sense that you got when you decided to actually we've got to change our approach to change?
Well, different cultures are very different to combine into one, right? Normally you'll have one prevailing culture and one that has to adapt. Especially if one of the companies is 30 people and the other one is 100,000. You kind of predict which culture is going to prevail in general. So it was much about making sure that, and of that microculture that Vodafone wanted as part of the acquisition, was given the room to live on. And to give the room, you kind of have to build, I almost thought about it as interfaces, as APIs, to say, okay, great, this is how we work in this part of the organization. Now, the rest of the organization, you keep working as you did. We might influence you, but you don't have to change your ways to accommodate this team. I'll make sure that there's appropriate interfaces towards it. So I don't know, the weekly reporting. How do you do that? Well, you don't try to change the weekly reporting of a megacorp. You fit straight into that. The governance, can't change that. You have to fit right into it. how you drive alignment. In a startup, driving alignment sometimes is very easy. Right? You stand up on the kind of tallest table you can find in the room, and you belch it out. It's not the way in the megacorp. It takes a bit more time. So I guess I took it upon myself, and it had a little bit of a team around me to build the alignment, the interface, and then I kept the kind of inner workings quite startup-y. So there was a startup within the company that worked by their inner logic and very fast. And then there was adequate interfaces up to the rest of the organization, which I think is the way to do it. It's utopian to think that you can come in and change 100,000 person company. You can't. Not from the bottom up.
You know what? I love the interface analogy. Do we need APIs to connect different groups of people? And this is the first time actually anybody's talked to me about this, and actually makes perfect sense, because actually even within Vodafone, there's got to be like micro cultures and different functions and different units, different regions, and I'm sure they're all kind of struggling to deal with the beast, so to say. But what they need to do is understand, here's the general compliance requirement. We just got to make sure we feed into that, but we can still operate to our best effort in our micro group here. Really interesting. We need to write better open APIs, I guess, culturally, so that people understand actually this group of people work like this, and that should be a good way to go.
Yeah, and I think like every company is there to make a positive impact, and everyone wants to unleash the talent of their people, but as you say, sometimes the feeding of the beast gets in the way, right? Structures can get in the way. It becomes more risk averse, etc. But I think it's the ambition of every company leader I've spoken to is to unlock the potential of their people, unlock innovation. The fact that it's not always successful is not because there's not the ambition and willingness to do it, but it's hard to do. So coming back to your fundamental question, is there different leadership capabilities you need? Yes, definitely. But also at the end, it comes down to the same principles. I don't think the principle is very different. But it's a different operating environment. You have to adapt.
Yeah, very, very good. How do you sort of avoid this institutional debt that accrues as you grow and scale a business? Because again, the analogy, 18 people around the table, boom, you're moving fast. Obviously, that can't stay forever, but there's so much quality that you want to preserve from there. This times 10 in terms of the numbers of people. It's gone to 100 people, or maybe it goes to 500 people. There's going to accrue cultural debt, I think you might call it. Various processes get laid in, and suddenly you have to do these steps, and it's a lot slower. As a leader, do you take any action to stop this or to correct for it? I hate to use Elon Musk as an example, because obviously we all have opinions of him, and there's various scenarios where he's totally gone off in the wrong direction. But he is, I think, particularly good in his anti-process attitude, where he thinks, okay, we need to delete as much as we add, because as we grow this business, what happens is we just accrue all of these processes that used to be of purposeful then, but actually now that they're an impediment going forward. Is there a technique that to identify what is like a bad process that needs to get rid of? Because it looks like it should be there, but actually,
yeah. So these processes creep in a lot when it's a kind of a reaction. It's a organizational reaction to a mistake happening or a mishap happening or something, and it's a good intention of saying, well, we need to make sure this never happens again. So let's put in this process, and it's very easy to add process, and sometimes, and most often, it ends up stifling innovation, ends up stifling everything. At the same time, too little process, and you can never scale. You will stay those 18 people around the table. So I just tend to be very cautious around where we allow process in and where we desire process and where we don't desire process. Anything that makes sure that the experience of dealing with a company is good and predictable, that's desirable process. anything that makes an employee stop and say, well, I don't think I can cross that line, or I'd like to explore over here, but I'm not going to do it. That's a bad thing. So I think if you have to work in company culture there, and one of the company culture traits that I always look for if I start working with a company or try to instill if it's not there is this acceptance of people should be able to make mistakes. They should be able to make big fuck ups, minor fuck ups, as long as it's coupled with a full transparency on the back of it saying, okay, here's what I did. Here's why it didn't work. Here's how I'm going to try to not do it again, but not close off the area just because somebody slipped and fell, right? Keep the area open. Share the experience that it's slippery over there. Be careful. And then go on. And I think we're succeeding. It's very hard to succeed to create a culture where people are comfortable making a mistake, because there are other cultures that are more process driven where you make one mistake and you have to cover it up, otherwise you're fired, right? People who've worked in those cultures, it's very difficult to get them to open up to say, no, it's not how we work here. But it's so important because, especially companies of our type, we're kind of chartering on uncharted territory. So there's no map. We don't know where the natural boundaries are, or very often we try to rejig the natural boundaries. So we have to have people taking risks. And I think that's the way to make sure it doesn't ossify the organizations. Just say, look, there are no real lanes. There are clear responsibilities, but you want to cross your lanes, do whatever you want. If you make a mistake a day and share it, that's much better than never making a mistake.
Yeah, and the worst thing you can do is to cover it up, as you say. And you see a lot of this if there's like too much reporting going on in a business, where reports are going up, and you think, what is a report? Like, why is there not just a dashboard or data that, shows what it is? Why has someone written this up? And it's like, yes, because it's a lot of ass covering. It's like, I want to present that I've done all of this stuff, when in fact, the dashboard should be there, or the data should just be, the primary source should be available for everyone to look at, and then it reduces the reporting load. So actually, this is relevant for anyone watching this who's in the recruiting side, because recruiters often do a lot of reporting up to managers, reporting up to C-level, whatever it is. Matt, if you're producing a lot of reports, have a think about trying to expose some of the data of the work you're doing. It will be in the ATS. Just expose that to the business, because then it will reduce your reporting load, but also increase the trust level, because every time you send a report, I think there's doubt in there, because someone's going to receive it and think, okay, this person's put this work in because they want me to think these things about that function or that person. Did you know that you were going to be an entrepreneur, Runar? Like, when did this bug happen? Was this like 5 years old? You were thinking, yeah, I'm doing this, or was there a scenario where that occurred and you thought, actually, here's an opportunity? When did you know you're going to do this sort of entrepreneurial path?
Unconsciously, pretty early on. I was always kind of on the side of the people building businesses, or I was very excited about the people in my family that ran their own little thing. Much more excited than somebody kind of at the top level of a big organization. I felt that it was a bigger achievement if you'd kind of built your own somehow. And I think throughout my career, I've been on the side of mini entrepreneurs in some way. But me, myself, I dabbled with some entrepreneurship, and then during my studies, I financed my studies with entrepreneurship. So I made the money along the way through building different things, selling ever bigger things that I couldn't deliver. So I got a network around me that could deliver it. So you can see where this was going. But yet, when I was done with my studies, I thought, okay, I'll go out and buy a suit, join a financial institution. So I did. Absolutely hated it. I've loved most of my jobs, but that was just, I watched my clock and I think, what's happening here? And someone called because they've read my thesis in university that I made into an article. And it was a guy in Copenhagen, and he was just about to relaunch a company that he just crashed and burned with. And I thought, well, that sounds exciting. Let's do that. Let's drop this financial institution. So I did, just to give it a try. So I think that that was the moment where I made the fork in the road, or met the fork in the road, and definitely took the road at that point less traveled by.
Do you know what? It's probably a fortunate thing that you had a taste of that early corporate world, financial world, so on, because if it's not right for you, you feel it in your water, don't you? And yeah, thankfully you found that sort of a right early point to pivot. There's a lot of people out there that are stuck on a track, and it's difficult to shake out of it, because I think if you've, let's say you've been 3 years in a corporate sphere, I think it's pretty difficult, increasingly so, to pivot out. So yeah, really good to know about this. What about being an entrepreneur are you good at? No entrepreneurs complete. We all human beings with strengths and weaknesses. If you could summarize, okay, here's the things I'm just consistently good at as an entrepreneur, as a leader, and here's a bunch of things actually I'm pretty bad at, and I need to be aware of that next time I do something. What are those things, Runar?
So much easier to answer your second question than the first question, right? What am I good at? I don't know. I'm definitely good at making things happen, and I think that is needed as an entrepreneur. I can
translating idea to outcomes, basically.
Yeah, and just kind of having a massive bias for action, just getting into action pretty quickly. And I think some sort of clear sight across strategy and people and other things. I don't know. It's call it intuition, or I call it having a very broad set of interests, so I can synthesize information quite quickly. So that's all good. What I'm not good at, it's a long list. It's a very long list. And I think most entrepreneurial leaders have a long list of what they're not good at, actually. Hence the propensity to try to build a team that's better than you really, really quickly, because otherwise you kind of know you're not going to go anywhere. So I would say there's nothing in the functions of a company that I would do better than the people that I can hire for those functions. So basically, I'm useless at every function in a way. Well, hopefully, I'm good at being a CEO.
Yeah, but you've got the ability to synthesize the information. As I say, the bias to action, I think, is really significant. That may actually be one of the, I wonder whether that is an innate characteristic, because a lot of people are a little bit more analytical, and they want to, they spend a lot of time thinking through. Of course, you should need to do that. But there's a risk that ends up all you doing. And actually, the output is not there, or the output is not at the volume or the impact, the virulence that it needs to be to move things along, particularly if you're starting something new.
Yeah.
When you're bringing people into your businesses or your teams, Runar, do you look for that entrepreneurial propensity for action? Do you think it's useful in a business, or do you think it might be harmful in some cases? In either case, how do you identify propensity for action when we're doing an interview? Because we're just talking, right? So how do we know this person is action oriented?
It's very difficult to spot it out. So that little story I told you about, the first startup I ever joined, the CEO and founder there, we're still very good friends, and I count him as a mentor. He didn't ask me many questions, but he didn't ask me one question. He said, if you buy a new tech gadget, and there's a manual on how to use it, what do you do? I said, well, I wish I said I'd read the manual, but I'll probably throw it away and just get fiddling right away. And I think that was the answer he was looking for. So, back to the weakness, I'm probably not very good at following instructions, but I'm trying to find the people that are very comfortable when there is no manual. Because we're always building, as I said, into uncharted territory. We can't copy anyone. We have to find the answers. Very often the answer is the synthesis of things that are already existing. It's It's not full of original thoughts always, but you have to be very comfortable in a dark room with with very limited information. And I do think there's something innate about that. And I do try to find those people. And you can find them in all sorts of ways, right? It doesn't have to be prior entrepreneurial experience. I hired somebody into Depop that was coming in initially to be an office manager. And I think we were 60 people at the time. And she'd just been sailing around the world for a year, and all sorts of things that happened on that journey. And I said, okay, so you sailed around the world in a small boat with 16 others and thousands of miles away from the next help station, and you had to take care of everything. Yeah, good. You're perfectly fitted for a startup. And I can't find a better experience than that. She hadn't joined a startup before, but she was clearly ready for that kind of experience.
Yeah, and those people are just so immediately impressive as well. I know as soon as you're telling the story of the lady on the boat, I was thinking immediately again of a friend of mine that it was like, okay, you'd immediately hire this person irrespective of job role or job definition. Like just get her into the team because she's going to immediately start adding value in ways you just didn't even understand was
Exactly.
that she could add value. Some people just have that quality. And yeah, I'd love to figure out like more forensically what that quality is. Um, you mentioned something about sort of oh, I've lost my train of thought here. So entrepreneurial sort of talent assessing for it. I love the heuristic about reading the manual. You've just inspired me actually to maybe do a collection of these, and all the recruiters are going to hate me for doing this collection because it's like, yeah, it's biased this, or it's not this, that, or the other. But I just want to know whether there's something there that is we can learn something from how these heuristics apply. I'll give you an example. There's a friend of mine who's also a tech entrepreneur, and he discovered that your Venmo sort of ratings are actually publicly accessible. So he's thinking, do I check your Venmo sort of ratings to see whether people think you're trustworthy in terms of these exchanges? And then I was thinking, yeah, there's another story of another CEO I knew who looked at Uber sort of ratings.
Oh yeah, of
So
course.
what is this like? Does he treat people well? Does he, on a service level? Like, I need to know on the character point of view. So I think there's a bunch of heuristics that, even though we don't like to admit that we use them, but we kind of think, okay, I'll lean it a little bit because there's something it tells us that a formalized process in what is an interview, which is typically more performative. We're all putting our best appearances on. That doesn't actually reflect what that human being actually is.